dozens of them, practices that have made it into the permanent collection I call my design toolbox. And the first goal that we're going to cover today, which is something I think is very important, is exploratory play for games based on simulation. I started working at the Sims division after taking a sabbatical from graduate school in 2005. I was 32 years old, and I had never worked on a commercial game. Should I repeat that? I had no experience, and they hired me to work on my favorite game. If you're sitting in the audience right now and you're thinking, I'd love to make video games, I'd love to make a difference in this community, but I'm too inexperienced, I'm too old, please think again. From a design perspective, what makes The Sims successful is that it is whimsically and wildly dynamic. The world simulates little people in an ever-changing environment, and events happen as you play with the system. Your character does these crazy, silly things, and it encourages you to try, to explore, to dig around in that space. What happens if I push this button? What happens if I push my character in this direction? How mean can I be? How silly can I be? Simulation on this level requires creativity in design because you need to encourage storytelling from a wide variety of players. And this is something that The Sims touched on that nothing else had really reached before its time. It also means that the designers have to build tools that support many different kinds of players. For example, your visions of how The Sims would run a business might look something like this. Or it might be a little bit more like this. I'd just like to direct your attention to the top corner of the screen where the executives are sitting on their desks and playing golf. Our goal as designers on this project, and I was just a little baby designer on this expansion pack, they were so gracious to hire me, was to make both of these visions and millions more possible with tools that were clear. And to create a game experience that's as dynamic as The Sims, that has as much going on. There are so many systems under the hood, calculating, churning, digging out numbers, making that water fountain go, running that guy through the sprinkler, making the dog bark, making the car move. All of that stuff is happening thanks to the glory of computation. And I mean everything, time of day, weather, the moods and actions of the different Sims, you name it. So in order to make changes to a system like that, to add something, to modify the behavior of a system, to remove behavior from the game because it's not really working correctly, it's super complex. It's a huge interdisciplinary job. And that meant that the most important practice that came from an exploratory design goal for working on this game was strong creative collaboration. If you wanted to make a decision about this game, it was going to touch something else. Guaranteed, it was going to be tied to something else. And that meant that every day we had to work with character artists, object animators, sound people, engineers, writers, producers. It was endless. In a typical day, we talked, and then we talked, and then we talked some more. And in the overlap of our ideas, there would become a solution. And that was how it worked. We constantly tried to communicate with each other. It was probably 90% of what we did. Design is really hard work, and we didn't always agree on the solutions. If something was going to take too long to build, or was going to be too complicated and introduce too many changes, we would have to start over. Or we would have to kind of jiggle the pieces around until they just fit right. And so that collaboration, that ability to communicate with one another was something that I picked up very early on, and it stayed in my toolbox this whole time. The next thing that I worked on was also a Sims game, but it was taking a little bit of the simulation away and adding a little bit more expression because it was focused on giving players tools to express themselves who were quite young. So My Sims was I think it was the second game that EA actually produced for the Nintendo Wii, which at the time was called The Revolution. I was so excited to be working on The Revolution. Everybody's like, is this going to work? Is Nintendo totally crazy? What is going on? And I would get to tell my friends, we're going to revolution. And then it became the Wii, and they all made fun of me. But then, it was really popular. We did several prototypes for My Sims, and we couldn't really figure out what we wanted to do with this crazy Wiimote thing, this pointer that you could use to touch the world. But in the end, what we decided we would do is we would create this touchable, tactile gameplay dollhouse experience where people could arrange homes and businesses in a little town by building them up and placing them to attract new town citizens. They could go inside the homes and decorate them. They could build furniture and give it away to different citizens. And they could even go around and explore the world, shaking trees and poking at things, digging things up to find goodies which they could use to customize their world. It was a design focused on this feeling of touching the screen. And we were so excited about this idea. But I'm going to tell you, it was really tough to move into a paradigm where suddenly, instead of all of this crazy UI that we had for the Sims PC experience, we had a very limited, very small UI that kids and parents could use to play with their Sims. I have to tell you, it was not intuitive to build, and it was certainly not intuitive for our playtesters. We had a lot of work to get this done right. Usually, you have so much information to communicate with a tool like this, and yet, if you communicate it in the wrong way or all at once, it totally overwhelms your players. And we really struggled with this on the project. What I learned working on this is that you have to think about your intuitions and question them. What seems compelling to someone in their 20s or intuitive to someone who's played games their whole lives might not necessarily read to a child of 7 or 8, or someone who's never held a controller without experiencing serious forms of dread. You really need to iterate and constantly test the assumptions that you have about your player. I find design to be totally humbling. Because in doing design of any type, but game design especially, you realize just how much you think you know about other people's perceptions. And I believe with time and practice, through game design, you can develop an ability to truly see through someone else's eyes, to see both sides of a design, to see both sides of a problem. If you can get that ability, you can see things that people see when they're not really there. If you have this ability to question yourself in your toolbox, you can know when something's really not going right, or better yet, you can see when it's going great. When your players are giving you so much that you don't really need to add any more. And that is something that has stuck with me forever. It will never go away. This is what kids see when they play with Legos. This is why Legos are awesome. I decided to take a trip down to LA with all my UI experience from My Sims and go to work on a new game that had an additional goal beyond just tools, which was experimentation, experimental play. Specifically, I went down to work with Steven Spielberg on the Blue Box series. He was the designer of the game, and I arrived to the game a few months into production. I was totally amazed by his dedication with checking in on the team, making time for us, having us in his schedule when his schedule was seriously totally booked. A truly amazing person to even be in the presence of. The core principle of this game design was experimentation. It was that people should feel comfortable playing to fail. We wanted them to experience the thrill of knocking down a huge stack of blocks that were going to blow up and just fly everywhere without ever thinking about cleaning them up or whether or not they got a perfect score. We didn't want them to feel that dread of failure. We wanted them to feel the excitement of making a big mess. And more importantly, we really wanted families to relax and spend time together while the blocks shimmied and shook and then toppled over. We wanted them to absorb subconsciously but very importantly, these concepts about how physics actually works. Havoc is the underlying physics system for this game, and the game is totally based on simulation. We wanted them to fail fast while having fun. And we did everything we could to make it super glittery and super chunky and shiny and explosive and silly so that they wouldn't take themselves too seriously, so that they would be like, yeah, I'm just going to let it rip. I'm going to throw this ball at the screen and watch these blocks fly. Unfortunately, what we found was that for kids, this was probably not a problem. But for their parents, the fear of failure was pretty strong. I could put 2 adults in a room playing the same exact game as 2 kids. The kids would get through 10 times as much content. When your player is doing this, moving the camera, looking at the person next to them on the couch, you know you're not succeeding. That's not a video game, that's a test. And getting them to build and experiment with this amazing tool set that we built, my husband and I worked on this tool together. We were so excited about it, and yet the parents were like, whoa, 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 you know, let's just go back to the main game. And the kids really wanted to put the little creatures down and throw balls at them and make everything explode. Parents, no way. Working on this game, after all the experiences I had with collaboration and all the experiences I had with questioning my assumptions, taught me something incredibly important. Once you have those 2 things in your design toolbox, you have to be able to focus your effort on the weakest part of the problem. You need to be able to knock that block out so everything else falls over. It's just like solving a puzzle in boom blocks. You need to focus on the things that are the most important to the players you want to reach. So, what was our problem on boom blocks? For the longest time, we needed to lower the barrier of entry to parents while expanding the creativity of the editor so that kids would have time to play with it in their spare time. Because there was going to be family time when they were encouraging their parents to have a good time, and then there was going to be playtime where they were actually building stuff and playing with it. And on the second version of this game, we actually got to build an editor that was live and online, and kids built puzzles and shared them with each other, and it was totally amazing. That's the one thing I learned. And the other thing I learned, strictly through osmosis, was that you need to be a force multiplier. Not only do you need to focus on the exact right point in a design and really nail that one problem, you need to do it with the help of everyone at your disposal. Spielberg has an uncanny ability to ask the right question. He does not tell you the answer. The answer comes from you. Watching the Boom Blocks Bash Party team, which was like 12 internal developers and about 7 contractors, knock out Bash Party in 9 months for half the cost of the original game with this kind of leadership taught me that you can do anything with a leader who is a force multiplier, who lets you make the right decisions when you need to make them, who encourages you to put your mind on the problem and trust you to run with it. Totally worth that lesson, 100%. And I carried this lesson forward with me to my next project, which is the last game we're going to talk about today, Journey. Journey is a game where you travel from a sandy desert to the peak of a distant mountain. How many of you had a chance to play it? Show of hands. All right, awesome. There's no spoilers in this. At the center of our design for this game was the hope that players who met each other online could experience a genuine human connection with each other. In much the same way as when you're hiking in the wilderness, you might stop to take in a view or introduce yourself or just even smile at a passing stranger. Whereas if you saw them on a crowded train, you would just look right through them. To do this, we decided to eliminate all voice chat, all text chat, even the names that would identify our players to each other, so that they could experience each other truly as equals in a barren landscape. But creating a genuine human connection between players, especially people experienced with online games, was a lot more challenging than we bargained for. Especially early on in our tests, it seemed like everyone was naturally predisposed to compete over resources, to race each other to points of interest, to be the leader, to run ahead. And it was tough. I mean, we really had to break through that behavior, and we didn't really know how to start. So we just began to prototype and implement different kinds of co-op gameplay. We built puzzles where players had to stand on separate switches. We built puzzles where they had to let down ladders for each other. We built puzzles that they had to push things over pits to make bridges for each other. And it just felt wrong. Over time, what we realized as a team, and this is a collective conversation, was that we were just band-aiding the problem. We needed to trust the players in our game and believe that they would see each other for who they really were. We needed to stop trying to force them to spend time together and encourage it. And when time spent alone in Journey felt truly lonely, and time spent together felt romantic and graceful and meaningful, people gravitated to one another. It took like 2 years. When two people are near each other in Journey, they glow. They are made of cloth, and when cloth touches cloth, it harmonizes. And they become lighter, and they can pass through the air a little bit. Not forever. If you call out, you can extend that a little bit, and if you work really hard together, it's a little bit of like an aerobic workout, you can actually kind of jump through the air and get to really great heights. It encourages people to be near each other, but it does not demand it. You can play the entire game alone, or you can adventure together. And so far, the feedback has been totally stunning. slides, which is what I do after I've been up all night working on them, thinking like, what is the point? And I asked myself, was it really all a series of happy accidents? Has my path through game design, or these tools that I've acquired, are they just luck? Or was there a thread there? And this is what I came up with. For every design goal that I've had to tackle, for every team that I've worked with, there has been a concrete and valuable practice that supports that goal. What's more, I really believe that these practices have scaffolded each other and that they build on one another over time. So here's the first one we talked about, explorational play in a game based on systems, which requires intense collaboration between all disciplines. We have the tools-based game, which supports expressive play. And the design practice that it requires is rigorous testing, rigorous questioning, rigorous empathy with your player. We have the learning game, which is experimental in nature, where we want players to fail but to feel good while they're doing it, because that's how you learn. And that required incredible focus, solving the right problems, not every problem, because in order to fail, people have to have problems. And there was the feeling goal, an experiential game that gave you a new feeling towards another person, which required trust. When I look at these practices through the larger lens of my life, and I step outside of myself, I see them as life practices themselves. Collaborating with people is about working with your peers. It's about understanding them and valuing them for their individual, quirky, nerdy, amazing, talented, temperamental selves. Testing, questioning your assumptions, involves really understanding and thinking about what you think you know, and being okay with being wrong. Focusing on the right problem, attacking the right thing, and not getting distracted means that you can be a force multiplier. It gives you the ability to really leverage the people that work with you so that you're not solving every problem. Because if you try to do that, you'll just wear yourself out. And trusting people that you work with and trusting your players means that you really have the ability to believe in others. It's not a common problem these days for people to have an overdose of belief in others. What does that mean to you? Games are a rich, flexible, vibrant, artistic medium. The games I showed you, the games upstairs, they give us the ability to explore, to experiment, to express ourselves, and to experience each other in new ways that improve our quality of life and our experience of life. And I truly believe that game design is good for you. I believe that with every game designer's toolbox that we build on this planet, we are building valuable practices that can be cultivated by everyone. Luckily for you, now is the best time to make games in the history of our medium. There are better tools, there are more communities for design, entire school programs that will teach you how to become a game designer, how to become a game artist, how to be a game programmer, a writer, a producer, a sound designer. If you are inspired by the games that you saw here today, I want you to join us. You are the designers of the future. You design the future. Don't wait for someone else to tell you what it is. Thank you.